on those at our last, I believe I reported on that at our last meeting, so I won't go into details there. They've had two additional special meetings last Tuesday and Wednesday. The first was regarding the Sebastopol Inn. As some of you may have seen in the Press Democrat, the county is interested in purchasing that for use as non-congregate low-income housing for those who are vulnerable to COVID-19, and then potentially afterwards to low-income residents. That is fully a county project. It would not go through city zoning as a because they would own the project, and a county-owned project in being done by the county is not subject to local zoning. I do know that they have had an additional outreach meeting with some of the business community who had expressed a lot of concerns at that meeting. And if I get further updates, I'm happy to share them with you, but that's pretty much all I know. If you are interested in that, the City Council recording is available, and that was held last Tuesday, the 12th. And then on the next evening, the 13th, they held a special meeting to talk about support for businesses during COVID-19. And a couple items that came up. One is they authorized, they heard a report from Commission, the Economic and Community Vitality firm that was hired, which has been mainly focused on businesses, and they were hired prior to COVID-19 to look at both community and economic vitality and future, doing some visioning. They kind of got repurposed to focus on assisting small businesses with COVID and to look at issues surrounding that. Two of the items that came up at the council meeting, one is a microloan for small businesses that they're putting together in partnership with the community credit union. And that'll be going back to council. I don't have a date for that exactly. And then one of the things that came up, which, and we can actually discuss after the later agenda item of items that come to DRB versus not as well, was to potentially change our facade improvement program, which right now is up to a $2,500 grant, which businesses can apply for. It's a matching grant that they need to do 50% of the cost, and then the city will sponsor 50% of the cost if it's approved. The council was interested in both promoting that program, but also changing the metrics so that it was a 75% city and 25% match for the businesses, and doing more outreach along with the micro business program. And so staff will be working on revisions to that. We have probably in the last few years gotten 2 or 3, sometimes 5 applications for those. I think they're hoping for more. They were talking about a $20,000 budget for that, which would be 8 to 10, depending on how much the businesses, not all request the entire amount. Would be one of the questions that we can perhaps discuss later on the agenda is whether or not, if that's restructured, whether or not those should come to the DRB for review. They generally end up being things like awnings, signage, painting buildings, things like that, which wouldn't necessarily come to this board. And then lastly, we do have, the county has set up the hotline for COVID-19 enforcement. The calls that are specific to Sebastopol are being routed to the building department to review, building and fire to review and respond accordingly. And so they've been busy with that. And obviously, as of yesterday and today, there's the fires up north of Armstrong Woods, which Ron, I'm sure I know you're very familiar as a docent for Armstrong Woods. And so they're on high alert at the fire department regarding that. There are no evacuation orders for Sebastopol right now, but they're fielding a lot of calls from the community, as one would expect. And I think that's about it for my remarks, unless there are any questions on any of these or other topics.
A couple questions. Fire away.
There's been an effort which you were spearheading somewhat, Carrie, about being able to do outdoor dining and parklets and taking over Highway 116. And I heard a sort of disappointing report on how that wasn't moving ahead, but I don't know if you can enlighten us any further.
Yes, thank you. That was actually one of the items that was discussed at the council meeting regarding the business support. And one of the issues is, 116 through downtown, as well as much of Highway 12, is Caltrans right-of-way. And their encroachment permits for the use of that is really restricted to the point where it doesn't really make a lot of sense for businesses to try to do it, or for the city to try to do it. However, council directed the engineering manager, who's the Caltrans liaison, to craft a letter, and the mayor has sent a letter to the governor to try to get some relief from some of those pretty restrictive requirements, so that the city could look at doing something along those lines. Mm-hmm. So that's still a developing project from that perspective. The county, I know, has, Linda Hopkins' office has also looked into it and kind of came to the same results so far, given Caltrans policy. And what it is, without going into too much detail, is that there's regulations that, or laws, not just regulations, that prohibit the use of public land for private use.
Right, so they should be public parklets, which is what they are in San Francisco, right? They're not private.
Right, but what you can put in them and not is also extremely prohibitive for businesses. So the mayor has sent a letter to the governor to ask for some relief from that, so that it can be used in a more practical way by the businesses. Okay. I do know that the city received comments on both sides of it, because there were certainly retail stores who were concerned about the loss of parking. So there are two sides to that, and again, it's developing, but at least from the governmental side, we're trying to have the governor address the statutes that are in the way right now.
Okay, thank you. And I also wanted to ask you about the hotel site here. So I had heard an update about that. I don't know if everybody knows it or what you know, but as I understand, the hotel has taken a kind of 2-year hiatus on any moving forward with any construction, because their bank is not willing to finance the project at this point. And so they've leased the site to Ned Kahn for 2 years for him to install sculpture there. Do you know that, or do you know, is that correct?
So I'm not aware of all of those details, but I do know that, yes, they are replacing the fence. I don't know if that's complete or not, Lars. You probably know more than I do. Yeah. Okay. The fence to be a nicer looking fence. And yes, they, Ned Kahn will be installing a temporary art exhibit there in the next few weeks or so. And we're going to be coordinating that with the Public Art Committee and the mobile art app. I have been in contact with the hotel group, Piazza group, about, trying to do a big push on the Public Art Committee is working on a mobile art app that maps all the art that's within walkable or around town and outdoor accessible art. I think they're leaving off Florence Avenue just because that's such an impacted street already, but elsewhere in town. And so, yeah, actually at the next public art meeting, which Lars is this group's liaison to, we'll probably be talking a little bit more detail about how to coordinate efforts to promote that app, but also the sculpture.
May I ask who Ned Kahn is?
Ned Kahn, he's a local sculptor that's world renowned, does kind of environmentally inspired sculpture in a very abstract way. If you drive on 3rd Street into Santa Rosa and you come up under the bridge, under the highway on the AT&T building, there's a shimmery sculpture that's his. You might recognize that.
And okay. Lars, do you know, did he also do the sculpture at the BART station at the airport? It's very similar to that.
I don't know.
Okay.
He's got, he works all over the world, and
Was he the guy that was supposed to do something over the bridge that was turned down?
it wasn't turned down. It's sort of still in process actually, but yes, he was with money that the Public Art Committee gets from development funds. They did an RFP. He was the first one selected for a project, but because it was on, back to Caltrans, because it's a Caltrans property, it's been just a very long extended process and very expensive one. So
Well, if I have to be a curmudgeon on this, putting bright reflected things right next to the highway is a rather stupid idea.
not when it's 40 feet in the air. It
Well,
met
maybe
all-
hung from balloons, maybe. Actually, I do have since you brought up Armstrong, since I'm the local connection there, I want to tell you a little bit about that. The last fire that went through Armstrong was 1926. It started in Rio Neto, was probably started at a illegal still, burned through Armstrong, did not kill one tree, at least a redwood, and burned all the way to the ocean, and nobody put it out.
There you
Well,
have it.
let's hope Armstrong sees the same fate if it's involved with a fire, because those redwood trees are magnificent.
Those trees will not be affected at all. History proves that.
All right. Thank you, Carrie and Lars and Ron, for the updates. Appreciate that. I think we'll move on to our next agenda item. Well, first, do we have any comments from the public on items that are not on our agenda? Do we have anybody here, or did anybody send anything in that we should be aware of?
I have not received any comments. I see Alan shaking his head, and our member of the public is an applicant for the next item, and he's shaking his head. So,
Being none, we'll move on to our first item on our agenda: the sign review for 848 Ravenstein Highway North, Exchange Bank.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to see everyone's here. So this is a sign permit and sign exception for the Exchange Bank located at 840 Gravenstein Highway North. The applicant is requesting for 3 signs, one of which is 3 signs on the 3 elevations, one facing Gravenstein Highway, one facing the road to the south, which I don't know how to pronounce, and one facing the parking lot to the west. So the sign facing Gravenstein Highway is proposed to be just over 18 square feet, whereas the 2 other signs, the one facing south and east, are proposed at just over 13 square feet. In total, the total sign area is just over 46 square feet, which is consistent with the maximum allowed sign area. One item I do want to note is that the application is proposing internal illumination, which the board has been rather strictly against in the past. And staff has talked to the applicant about this, and during and before the submittal, and encouraged alternative external illumination means, such as halo illumination or gooseneck, for example. And the applicant did proceed with moving forward with the application as currently proposed. So the application would also require a sign exception, as the code only allows for a maximum of 2 wall signs, for example. And the applicant has provided their findings for these. In general, the main reason for this is that the west-facing sign will have very limited have very limited abilities to be seen from the public right away, and that it's primarily being used to mark the entrance of the branch, which faces the parking lot on the west elevation of the building. In general, so in staff's analysis, staff finds that the sign is consistent with the square footage limitation, but did and does have concerns regarding the illumination. Once again, as I mentioned before, staff did discourage this and noted that in the past the board has been rather strict with discouraging or prohibiting internal illumination throughout the city. And given the type of sign given the lighting options, staff did talk to the applicant in terms of what alternatives would be acceptable. Halo illumination seems to be a potentially acceptable alternative, which would have, an opaque face and have a glow around the sign and would not shine the light through, similar to the Pete's Coffee sign over on Petaluma Avenue. As for the sign exception, staff would recommend against it. The findings just don't seem to be there as outlined in the staff report and staff's opinion. Which I can go more in detail about, but in general, the finding B seems to be the most applicable to the site, but given the architecture and development of the site, it doesn't, and this being a single tenant building with the entrance facing the parking lot, it doesn't necessarily seem like I'm trying to find the right word here, but it doesn't seem this is necessarily, it seems like this would create a precedent for a single tenant building having 3 signs on each elevation. And in the area, when I was looking through, I didn't find any permitted signs in that area that allowed for more than 2 signs. In general, staff would recommend the denial of the sign exception, but conditionally approving the application with requiring, reverse pan individual channel letter signs with halo illumination limited to 2700 Kelvin, which is what the board and the city had previously acted on. And allowing the signs facing Gramercy Highway and, I'm going to try to pronounce it, Tochini Street, which would prohibit the 3rd sign, which would face the parking lot. So in general, that would conclude staff's report. And if you have any questions for me, please let me know.
All right, thank you, Alan. Any questions of staff? Okay,
Good
so
report.
go ahead.
That was a good report. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, we've got lighting is an issue, size is not, and the exception is only related to the number of signs allowed, 2 versus 3.
Correct.
Okay. And our applicant is with us. Would you like to make a presentation?
Just very briefly, I had the chance to review the staff recommendations with my client, which were in line with what we expected based on the conversations that we had, and let them know that I was going to basically extend their wish and ours that we move forward with the application approval as conditioned, and we're happy with that.
All right. Thank you very much. Any questions of our applicant? All right, seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Let's see, Carrie, any comments? Any thoughts?
No, I mean, I think staff fairly outlined it well. I think it was really well presented by Alan. So, yeah, I'm more inclined to follow staff's recommendations and not, go against that, as well as any future precedents that we may set. So,
yeah, sounds reasonable. Ron, any comments?
Yeah, I would say a bank, an existing bank, doesn't need the signage or illumination compared to other businesses because they're not trying to attract somebody off the road to come in. The bank would, and I'm a member of Exchange Bank and I'm happy with it, but as far as illumination, that's for McDonald's and other places that need to attract people to bring people in. Bank has pretty much established colors, so I don't think they really need it. I guess that's my opinion.
Yeah. Lars, what are your thoughts?
Different kind of business.
Yeah. Lars, what are your thoughts?
I'd agree with the staff's analysis. It's thorough and makes sense. The back elevation feels like it doesn't really need a sign. You already know you're there. I think there's an opportunity. Like, I'd be curious what the same sign looked like in a different style, because it has such a, kind of iconic, internally lit style to it, almost in the brand. So I don't know that you would want to take that exact thing and just change the way it's lit. But I'm not, that's not for me to decide. It just has a dated look to me, and you put it on that beautiful building, and it feels like it needs a complete redesign, to me. But
Yeah.
that's not my place. But otherwise, I'm happy with the way it's been presented by staff. And
I feel exactly the same way. I think they've got in fact, I remember when this building came to us, and it was stressed that this is kind of a landmark building for them. And it's not a landmark signage solution. It seems like they need a signage solution that speaks to that building. And it seems like they need a lighting solution that speaks to that building. That building is making a statement, and then to kind of stick plastic face lit letters, kind of retail letters on a building like this seems like a shame. It seems like a very big missed opportunity. So I think it was something that was nicely halo lit or lit from the canopies above. There's lots of lighting opportunities here to be had. The size is certainly appropriate. I think some of the locations probably could have been sweat a little bit to get it to work within some of the composition of the building a little better. Lighting could certainly work better. I agree that the third sign, if you made it to the garage, to the parking lot, and you don't know where you are, then you've got a problem. And there's probably going to be graphics on the window, a logo on the window, the back doors as well. So I feel exactly the same way. I'm in agreement with staff. I think 2 signs is appropriate. I think the lighting needs some work, and size is fine. So somebody want to throw a motion on the table? It sounds like we're kind of all in agreement for either continuation or denial, one of the two.
That's a good question. I didn't know if it was quite a denial, so I think it may be a continuation. Can you help me with that?
well, the staff is recommending a denial of the sign exception,
Right.
and approving the sign permit as condition.
See.
Yeah. So I guess we could, we could approve the locations, the sizes, with the condition that it's halo lit, and then deny the exception for the third sign.
Mhm.
Would be one avenue.
Yeah.
Yeah. How they end up halo lighting the logo is a little bit of a challenge. I mean, it can be done, kind of layering it up. And that would mean that we wouldn't see that come back to us. I'm not sure if we can.
Just to kind of chime in. So as the recommended approval is currently written, it would not return back to the board. But I think we could do an option where essentially before they submit to building or before it's approved by planning, we could have, per the board, have a member of the board kind of review it and make sure it's appropriate or consistent with the lighting that would be intended. We could have something along those lines. Instead of bringing it back to a whole meeting, if the board feels that one member can accommodate this or provide clear recommendations on it, we'd maybe go that path.
Yeah. That would be fine with me, and I'd be happy to volunteer to do that. So
You'd certainly be most qualified, Ted.
the one thing I'm qualified for.
Good.
All right, so it sounds like we're heading toward a motion to approve the size, the location, with the condition that it's halo lit and reviewed by one board member, and then a denial of the exception for the third sign. So do we call that a motion and
Call that a motion.
call that a motion? It's close enough.
All right,
Somebody want to second that?
I'll second.
All right, we've got Carrie for a second. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, for mine, could I get who motioned it again?
I did. Ted.
Thank you.
All right. Kevin, thank you very much for your application. We look forward to seeing the next iteration, or I look forward to it. I guess I'll be the one.
Great, and should I channel that through planning to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Planning will coordinate all that.
Great. And I just want to say thank you to Associate Director Montes for his guidance and accessibility through the whole process. It's been a pleasure. So, thank you.
Way to go, Alan.
Kevin.
All right. Thanks again. All right. Back to our agenda. So the next thing on our agenda is a discussion of DRB review. When it's needed, when it's not needed, is that what we're kind of talking about?
Right.
What sort of items would be a staff level approval? What sort of items come to this board?
Correct. So if it's all right, if I can kind of dive into the staff report a little bit and give a little bit more detail.
Please do.
All right, so thank you guys again for that. So as the staff report mentions, there is a section of the code that allows the board to delegate essentially certain items of review to the planning director and therefore associate staff as well. So we're kind of looking for the board's feedback and input on what items in general, in broad terms, that the board would feel comfortable with staff acting on, such as outdoor decks and patios like the Crooked Goat application, or awnings, shade structures, or small additions that are not visible from the right-of-way and have no privacy concerns. And with this, I think for both Carrie and I, we're both relatively new to Sebastopol's planning department, and we're looking to kind of, the last thing we want to do is step on the board's toes and approve something at staff level that required that should have gone to the board. And with this, we're not saying that every patio would be a staff level action, but rather that if it's consistent, it's well designed, it's pretty standard in terms of a design, it's nothing questionable. Is that something that staff would have, that the board would feel comfortable with staff acting on? And at the same time, if staff ever sees something that is questionable that the board has delegated or given staff the ability to act on, we could always still elevate it and take it back to the board if we have design concerns. So what we're really looking for is kind of for the board to discuss and provide us some feedback on, if this is something that the board would like to give staff the power to do, or what items in general would be, or is this just, no, we want to see everything. And Carrie, if you have anything to add, please chime in.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great summary. And as Alan said, we always have the authority to take something that we don't feel is complying and referring it to the board for discussion. But we also want to be respectful of applicants' time and money going through the process, and not make a process just to have one. So any guidance would be appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah, so here's another question. If there's something that that is kind of on the line where you're not sure, is there a way to sort of informally route that to the board and just ask the question? Do you think this should be agendized, or is something that could be?
Yeah, thank you, Ted. We can't route it to the entire board because that would be a Brown Act sort of decision-making
Right.
outside of the public process. But what we can do, and what I've often done in the past, is speak with the chair, or if the chair's not available, the vice chair, and get a read on it that way. And Ted, I know you and I, as you were chair, when I first got here, had a conversation about similar to this of how does it work here? What level of things do you see? So that is in effect asking the chair to help make a decision for things that are on the fence, as you say.
Yeah. And I guess my gut feeling is, things like the Crooked Goat patio, somebody modifying a fence, somebody, making alterations to kind of auxiliary structures, not even secondary structures, sort of tertiary level structures. I think my feeling is those could and probably should be staff level reviewed. When it comes to changes in architecture and storefront and those sorts of things, I think that's kind of when it would trigger the design review. It's kind of my feeling.
I might beg to differ on that, Ted.
Okay.
And in fact, when I read and I remember Mr. Langberg's comments in the Crooked Goat application, but I didn't feel that sentiment personally. I'm kind of glad the board got a chance to review the application.
Right.
That's no disrespect to our fellow board members, but yeah, site work has a strong relevance to to architecture, and I think it's important. And I would, where the cutoff is and where the level is from what staff reviews from the DRB, I feel like I was happy to review that application, and I felt it pertinent to the board to give that feedback. So I'm going to respectfully disagree in the Crooked Goat application.
Yeah.
So that's just my own comments there.
No, and I totally understand that. And I guess on the other side of this too is that we're a board that doesn't meet very often.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly happy to chime in on anything. I mean, I have no problem with seeing everything, because it's not like we have 20 things on every one of our agendas and we're going till 9 o'clock at night. So yeah, and I agree. There are certain things that
I just feel that staff has been very influential on what we see and what we don't see, and I respect that. And I'm being forthcoming here to say that there's a cutoff at some point, and I don't want to be wasteful or disrespectful to a client's application and their money and everyone's time. So I do understand that aspect of this process. But again, I'm just a little concerned about rogueness in general, and especially if it comes to site design, because that's where I would maybe beg to differ. So,
no, I agree with that, and I guess the other side of it is, if the applicant knows that they need to kind of meet the level of review of a design review committee, they might be motivated to bring a little better, a more thought out thing than if they know they're not going to be reviewed. So there's that aspect of it as well.
And Ted, if I may, on that aspect, one of the things that we can often use to, for people who don't necessarily agree with staff is, if we don't feel it's consistent, it will be going to the design review board. But if you make these changes, then it will be consistent with their design review guidelines for those things that are on the fence. And I'm not advocating either way. I think in my mind, I've seen a couple applications or a couple of items where like the Hop Monk patio expansion, I saw that was done at the staff level. I actually felt that really should have come to the DRB because it impacted their whole rear access to that patio, their parking, and that, they have a garage and storage back there that now their garbage is out in the parking lot, and all of those two things kind of interact in the site level. If that had come during my time, I probably would have referred that to the DRB. I know the hand line had a whole site review. They had a fence where the initial fence was a solid 6 foot along the sidewalk. And full disclosure, I wrote a public comment that I didn't think that's what the fence guidelines really, the fact that there was no setback didn't make that necessarily appropriate. And it sounds like whoever was on the DRB at the time agreed with that. So those are the types of things that, if they're smaller and we're just trying to find the right space to work in and work with you guys.
I think can I state my thought on this one? Yeah, I think on this particular matter, I can see both sides of this one. I think what we have to use here more than anything else is something called common sense. Some things are very appropriate for what we do, and then there are probably some others that are a total waste of our time. So I don't have a hardcore yes or no on this one, but I think some things obviously probably don't need our approval or our time, even though we have plenty of it these days. So anyway, that's kind of my opinion.
I personally can't think of any design review board meeting that I've attended that was a waste of my time. I'll put it that way. And I'm also optimistic that possibly some new, less subjective design guidelines may make these decisions and questions that we're asking ourselves now a little bit more transparent. So I think that's sort of the nature and the overall intent for creating less subjective guidelines. So correct me if I'm wrong, board, but that's what I'm kind of looking forward to as well.
Yeah, certainly hope that's going to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
Lois, what are your feelings on the subject?
That I was going to bring up that point. I think if the design guidelines are clear and they're well thought out and innovative, then it will be clear what should come here or not. It'll be more clear anyway. There's always going to be things that are a little hard to decipher, or to figure out which way to go. But I was going to say that, and Kara, definitely like what you're saying about site work or work looking at that. My point with that project was I know some of the members of the planning commission, and there's design and skill there too, and it felt to me like it was an opportunity to skip one step. If they, in a sense, they could have been the design review board for something because it was so small.
Yeah.
That was my only point. Really.
Oh, I fully respect that, Lars. And
I think what you're saying is so important. It isn't the thing we sort of see as big and bold as the building design or the facade or whatever. So it has huge implications. So we need to take that as seriously for sure.
When I tune into these DRB meetings, and generally when we're in person, I learn a lot from my colleagues, and I learn a lot from the public. I learn a lot from staff, and it's pretty cool. I didn't think I'd want to be doing this, and I've been doing it for a while now, and seeing the precedents kind of supersede time after time, and the consistency through the board's been an exciting I guess process for us, and so I learn, and everyone, it's a agree to disagree is a great thing. It's part of this process. So that's where I learn, and that's what I find so unique to this. So those are my comments.
I want to tag onto that. Like, I haven't been on a meeting, like you said, where it's been a waste of time. And I'd say maybe 99% of the time, it hasn't been a waste of time for the applicant either. In the big picture of how long it takes to do a project and approve it and build it, et cetera, another couple weeks, or month or whatever to come in front of us, I think is very important.
Well said.
Well, I guess I should comment on my waste of time comment, right?
No, you don't need to, Ron. It's just a figure of speech, and I get that. But I just want to be really clear that,
Well, here's what I'm coming. I'm coming from a different area than you guys, since I'm the old guy on this. I'm kind of a libertarian, and I hesitate when government gets too involved controlling everything. So I'm a little hesitant at times where we're losing our freedom to government regulations, and I know there are certain ones you have to do, but throwing more regulations and stuff, especially to businesses in this town that is suffering greatly, I'm not sure you just automatically jump on the bandwagon and say the design review board should control everything as well as anything else. I mean, you have to let the local businesses decide some things for themselves. We're all educated in different areas. I'm very proud to be a member of this group, but I don't want to get to a point where the government controls everything. That's the libertarian in me, okay? So that's the way I feel. So that's why I'm kind of out there.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that as well, Ron. I think I just see consistency being the precedent in this process. And I just wanted to note that as a small business owner in this town, I've followed the guidelines from my signage, and I would expect others to do the same. And so the consistency is, I think, what again, that's why we're rewriting design review guidelines to become less subjective. It's just that I feel like it would be important for others to play by those rules as others have. So, and I agree, less bureaucracy and putting money in the pockets of a small business is exactly what needs to happen. Because, yeah, you just said it earlier, it's hard.
Okay.
I think that's all good stuff.
Thank
This
you.
is
That
this is dialogue, correct?
Yeah, no, this
We
is
don't
all,
vote on
this
this, do we?
is just a feedback session. All of
Okay.
everything that we've heard, I think, is helpful for me, and I suspect for Alan as well, in terms of guiding us as we see projects come through the door that are, smaller and making that assessment. Happy to have any more comments on that, but if not, then I would ask that we spend a couple minutes on thoughts about the facade improvement program and utilizing this board for that. And Ron, that should make you comfortable because it's the government giving away money, not taking money.
So for full disclosure, I actually have an application that I'm staring at right here. I don't know if that does that disqualify my.
That
Clearly, it would as a
is-
design review board member, but
I don't know. Let's have a look at it.
it's about paint. Yeah, when you had ivy growing on the side of the south side of a building for about 20 years, it makes a different effect.
I think that's called it wreaks havoc.
It wreaks havoc. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. So we've been sort of thinking about, maybe just what it would take to kind of give this life a little bit, this beige building, or I think it's grayish. I don't know what color it is. It's pretty boring. Some love.
So I can answer your conflict question. That is not a conflict. This any actual application would be, but you represent two things. One, as a group, you represent the broader community perspective, and most importantly, we're not asking for recommendations even, and the council will be making the ultimate decision on this. So this is, again, just sort of simple feedback, and there's a couple of different ways we could restructure the program, and depending on what council is interested in, we can, right now it's a over-the-counter application. And we just take them in the door as we come. In the last couple of years that I've been here, and it looks like from the budget, a couple of years prior to that, there were unfulfilled. There was still money left over at the end of the fiscal year for that program, so it was never fully utilized or oversubscribed. But with the change in policy to have a lower match from and additional outreach, there is that possibility. A couple of different ways the program could be structured would be to have, say, quarterly deadlines, and then you'd have a meeting each quarter to review whatever applications came in at that time. Of course, we could also front load it with a, not necessarily keeping a quarter of the money every time, but because there are a lot of businesses out there right now in need. To have that application be sort of a set date a couple months after council has started advertising, it has approved it and started advertising, and then but I'm curious what the board feels in terms of having input into those grants.
Well, can you in some of the history, I was just curious, when did the program actually start? Because it's my understanding it's kind of been around for a while.
Yeah, it has been around for a while. I'm not fully versed on the history, but it looks like it began during redevelopment with some redevelopment funding, and then it was put on hold for a number of years and then resurrected after the Great Recession as a way to try to assist sprucing up the town and downtown. It's not limited to downtown either. It's any business in town can apply for it.
Who has utilized it recently?
Yeah.
So I can answer one of them. Those Bohemia Stoneworks.
Okay.
There was that. I don't think they've actually implemented it yet, but the Bear Radiance Salon over on Weeks Way, right behind you, Lars.
Oh yeah.
So
And the design for that came to this board.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool.
Why did that come to this board?
It was the modifications to the facade.
To the facade. So there are certain guidelines, obviously, for this application. It could only be what? Paint and lighting, not even lighting, or what can it be?
It can be lighting. It needs to be affixed to the building, so it can be signage, it can be paint, it can be awning replacements. It could be and we did have one from mothers.
Irrigation?
I don't know if it could, Alan, I don't know if you can look that up while I'm talking to see if irrigation and landscape are potential improvements. We'll need to check on that. But yeah, if you wanted to completely redo your facade, you know, go from brick to stucco or something like that, any of those are eligible. Obviously, the costs are much greater, so it would be a smaller grant, but you can certainly go over that for your portion of it.
So Bear Radiance came to us because those things went above the parapet, basically, the little bamboo fencing thing. That's
Yeah.
why it came to DRB.
Yeah, so if they were just doing like, let's say, repainting the building or brushing up the paint, that wouldn't require it, but because they're actually doing like physical changes and architectural changes to the
Well,
facade.
but Carrie just said anything attached to the building. Like, that seems like a decorative item that was attached to the building. It's not an addition to the building, right? It would be more like an awning, but it just happened to be up there instead of out the front or something. I don't know. It seems like it fits in that category, those categories.
Yes, and that one was eligible and was awarded a facade improvement grant in the last fiscal year. Yeah, they needed to come to this board for the design review component of the facade, is what Alan's saying. The changes to the facade,
Okay.
which is maybe the first half of the discussion of what level of design changes do you guys want to see?
Right.
Got it.
And I'm going to touch on what Kara was saying earlier about items eligible. So it's paint, new signage, awnings, landscaping, exterior lighting, and you can apply some of it towards local permitting fees as well.
Okay,
No,
that's-
that said, Carrie, I think there's nothing that says we can't revise this as it's going back to council and say, you know, why can't landscape upgrades be included? There's certainly some sites outside of downtown that could utilize that. The intent is that it be a long enough term that it's more of a capital improvement and not something that's going to be just a temporary thing. And then two of the big things that are not eligible, one is the retroactive. So you can't do something and then come in and ask for money. We have had a few of those in the past. The Masons Lodge and the Chamber, and I think a couple others who did that. And it's great that they made those, but unfortunately it doesn't qualify for the program.
Yeah, I can't imagine that would.
Right, and the other is new construction. So like Exchange Bank, it's not an improvement, it's your first shot at it, right?
Got
So,
it. Yeah.
Well, when you describe the way you just described it, like it's meant to be long-lasting or long-term improvements, like that makes me think we should review more often than not, in a way. And but maybe I like the idea of sort of the quarterly, like here's a batch, you know, DRB. This quarter we get one meeting that's all those applications for that time frame, and we can, you know, kind of go through them. And so I don't know, it seems like if they're really meant to be substantial improvements in their intent, then why wouldn't they come to us?
Sure, and I think that's also the other thing that's helpful is if we get $25,000 worth of applications and we only have a budget of 20,000, then you know that decision making and award process would fall to the board.
Yeah.
So the application gets put in, and at this point, staff can approve or deny it. Is that right?
That's correct. That's how it works now. And I think last year we had about $6,000 worth of grant. I think it was 3 or 4. And I think it was about the same, 6,000 to 8,000 in the prior year. And I think the year before that it was maybe about 11,000. The whole budget used to be 25,000. The carryover, the current adopted budget is 6,000 just because they carried over whatever the expenses were last year. I had already requested before council discussed it to increase it to 20,000, knowing that there might be more interest this year and more need this year. And the budget subcommittee has reviewed and agreed with that. And then one of the budget subcommittee council members is the one who brought it up at their council meeting recently.
Carrie, I guess I don't understand here. Are we moving towards any kind of vote or just a general consensus how we feel? What's the intent of what we're doing right now?
So consensus is fine. I don't think and it doesn't need to be complete, but just a sense of whether that's something this board would be interested in taking on is really what we're asking.
Carrie, do you feel like, or you guys, since when you've gotten them, is it like an overwhelming task for you to do? Like, do you need our assistance, so to speak?
Not for some of them, you know, the ones that are just, hey, I'm trying to replace my sign, which is clearly degraded, with a new sign, and the sign meets all of our administrative, you know, say it's an administrative sign that wouldn't come to this body, or an awning, which is clearly deteriorated and needs to be replaced. Those are kind of the easy ones that we can do at a staff level. I think where the DRB would be helpful is, again, if it's overprescribed, if there's more applications than money. Of course, we can always go back to council and ask for more funding, but I think in that case, at least having the DRB weigh in on what is worthy and what's not. I can't say we've denied any in the last 2 years other than things that weren't eligible. We may have suggested some changes to people's projects, but that's it.
You know, I for one don't have any problem being involved at any level you'd like us to be involved, or me to be involved. I don't know if I speak for the group, but it sounds like something that could and probably should involve us in a lot of cases.
One of the other things that I know I've been thinking about is how can we get more businesses interested in, you know, the outreach of it. And this is an opportunity where the city is going to be doing outreach on the loan program anyway. Previously, we've included them with we have some folders for new businesses when they come in that have their business license and other information. And we've included the facade improvement information in that. And I think we caught a couple people that way. And it may be that if the DRB is reviewing it and we can advertise the quarterly deadlines, it may actually get the word out a little bit more than it is now.
Yeah, it's a nice program.
I was going to say the same thing. It's great.
Yeah.
I mean, what a fantastic way of you know, kind of sprucing things up. I mean, and having a little bit of available cash for folks who want to but maybe can't.
Yeah, and I know that it's often difficult to find businesses to participate in these things. We've been involved with cities that have done the same thing, and they just don't have a lot of takers.
Yeah. Well, I can honestly say, from having reviewed the application, you know, it has requirements, and I think that they're fair and they're reasonable. Like, for example, contractors must be properly licensed, you know, and you know, that you have bids submitted and these sort of things. So that's pretty much. I mean, I've had this one since I had one since 18, and I've had another since 19, and it's hard to get it together, you know. Quite frankly, that's why I haven't done it. It just takes time, and it takes effort on a small business's part to do it, which I think there's the reciprocation. So it's a great project, but you know, it wants to get done right. It definitely wants to get done right, and it definitely makes the capital improvements, I think, relative to this town.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, is that enough? Is that enough feedback, Carrie?
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I'm going to look to Alan because he's going to write that staff report.
Did you get all that?
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like the board's open to being helping with it, and generally, I think we're still trying to look at how this program will maybe be restructured.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm happy to hear the board is at least interested in participating and assisting if needed, and open to the concept of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess the kind of last thing is, like, if in terms of changes to the program or like reviewing it, I guess if the board has any opinions or thoughts on it. I know Carrie brought up the idea of like potentially batching, quarterly or maybe more frequently or less frequently, but kind of batching it and awarding it out in kind of groups. I personally kind of like that idea, having a couple, hopefully a handful of applications, be able to bring it to the board, get feedback, opinions, and allocating it out kind of essentially in an event. I like that concept, and I think it's kind of exciting that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's all I really
Yeah,
have.
thank you.
That all sounds good.
Yeah, it's a good time.
All right. What else do we have? I think that's all we have on our agenda, is it not?
Yes, that does conclude the itemized agendas.
All right, then I guess our meeting is adjourned until next time. I think that was great discussion. Really appreciate it. Very thoughtful, and appreciate everybody's input.
Yes,
Thank you for concluding here before 5 o'clock, because it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and it's probably Miller time for at least some people, retired.
It's 5 o'clock. 1 minute, we're on 1 minute.
Oh, I can't.
Happy